computer? Great. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Stevie Carr, founder and CEO of Wise Wellness Guild, a community dedicated to the advancement of women through whole self wellness. Whole self wellness meaning not just a smoothie or about going to yoga, but it's about really thinking about our whole selves as a unit and thinking about the ebb and flow of what life kind of brings us. Tonight, we're going to be speaking with expert Kaitlin Bolt-Levett, who is a registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor. She will share more about what all of that entails, but I am just so thrilled to have her here this evening because this is something that for women, since, we, before we really hit puberty, something that I think as a culture, we really need to address if we're going to advance ourselves in this world. And I think that the work that Kaitlin has done so far personally, and then also as she's shifted into professionally, speaks for itself. And I just cannot wait to see how the dialogue moves. This is an incredibly safe space for everybody to have this discussion. This is being recorded, just being able to go back and kind of share. This is something that if you do not want this to be posted or you're uncomfortable with something that you'll be sharing, I will absolutely hold on posting anything, and you can let me know whether, if that's something that you don't want to share onward with people who couldn't join this evening. So Kaitlin, thank you so much for being here this evening. We're just really grateful for Crunchmaster for helping to put this on as our presenting sponsor because they are really, advocating for creating space and a break for this, for all of us to be able to take the time to invest in ourselves. And so thank you. I know you're incredibly busy. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Stevie. I am so excited to be here, and thank you all for being here too. And I would like to echo what you said as well. If any questions come up during, I would love to hear them. And if you also don't feel comfortable asking a question on your actual video, feel free to send that through the chat too, and then we can answer them that way as well. Yeah, but I am just so excited to be here and excited to obviously have this conversation and be able to bring one of my favorites is just being able to bring this conversation forward and to have groups with women especially. I think that is so powerful and empowering, and I just really appreciate getting to do this tonight on a Wednesday.
Great.
See, well,
I was going to say, so what I would say is I'm not sure if anybody was able to dig into a little bit of the pre-reading. And Kaitlin, and she'll go through everything, but in case you weren't able to, her pre-reading should be in your inbox. And a lot of what I thought was interesting is words that I've heard, such as intuitive eating and diet culture and all of these buzzwords that kind of keep flying around. It's so fascinating because I think that the words themselves, people see them and they automatically assume what they are. And so I think that I'm excited to have you kind of take us through a lot of this journey. And then, like I said, just leave room for dialogue and discussion. So I'm going to go on mute and let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Stevie. Yeah, I totally agree. It's some of these words, I'm so used to them now that I forget that not everyone has heard of them. So it is important, and I'm actually going to start this presentation with kind of going through some of those words. And what I want to start by saying is some of these topics are tough. They are not easy topics. This is not, if I wanted to be, not to knock dietitians who do this, but if I wanted to do meal plans, that would be a lot easier to do. This stuff really dives into the behavioral, the emotional, the little t, big T trauma. And I wanted to start a little bit by telling you a little bit about my story before we go into the presentation. I grew up, I was an athlete for 12 years. I was a synchronized swimmer, competitive. My goal was to go to the Olympics, and ended up going to Ohio State University, which is a varsity school. I was diagnosed with a sports-induced eating disorder when I was just turned 17. pretty soon after I'd moved out to California. And for me, my relationship with food had issues since I can trace it back to about 8 years old. And my sense of worthiness as a human being and my sense of being enough in my body and showing up as is was just lacking. And so for me, by the time I was actually diagnosed with my sports-induced eating disorder, it had been going on for over 10 years. And what the therapist that I ended up having to see told me was that this would be something I would live with for the rest of my life. And that was really tough to hear at the age of 18, that this is something that I was going to always have to deal with, because it was a constant everyday struggle. It took so much life out of me. I don't remember so much of my life because I was always in fight or flight. And for me, being able to, I was a synchronized swimmer, and then I got burnt out. So then I went to pastry school, went to Chicago, New York, but all I knew was burnout. So talk about boundaries. Coming back to Cincinnati and deciding to go back to school for dietetics, I really had to learn by my third year what boundaries and being able to swing the pendulum back and forth between, work, relationships, school, family, and really what that integration looks like, because I was always working on burnout. And through this work and being able to, start my own business and start this practice, what I really wanted to do was empower women not only to heal their relationships with food and body image, but to learn some of these self-care tips, to be able to learn how to take care of themselves and really nourish themselves. And sometimes nutrition or behaviors are that little inkling of a start to really jump us into how else can we have, effect, how else can we contribute to our lives. And for me, finding this work after leaving school, I knew I was going to go on my own thing, but I was still very steeped in what I will explain as diet culture. I was still very clean eating and very afraid of food and in constant fear. And I had a lot of gut issues. And it really took me going on my honeymoon, where I was popping, French Imodium and Gas X and, had terrible acid reflux and was just miserable, to really realize that I could not continue on what I was doing. And so I had been giving an intuitive eating book a long time ago and I wasn't ready for it. And for me, coming back to that book and really starting to listen of, I can actually have freedom with food and not feel restricted by food. I can actually use food and different ways to nourish my body. And it really started to feel like I had my life back. So I wanted to kind of start with that, and then we'll go ahead and go into the presentation. And I'm going to try to make the presentation go by quickly. I know it's kind of boring to go through those, but I am going to interrupt some of the slides to ask questions. So if you feel inclined to answer the question that I'm asking, please feel free to, Stevie, you'll kind of let me know. And then if not, I can kind of keep going through the slides and we'll leave plenty of questions at the end as well. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So I wanted to first say thank you to Stevie, Wise Wellness Guild, and Crunchmaster. So let's go ahead and start. What does it mean to be an anti-diet dietitian? So that is basically what I start with. I am a non-diet, anti-diet dietitian. And that means I'm going up against the oppression of diet culture. And what I really do is work to help individuals find freedom and empowerment from disrupting this diet culture with their food and body. Dieting has become so normalized in our culture, and it's very difficult to untangle what weight loss and health actually look like, because they have been so commodified and kind of pushed together. And it's, a $60 billion industry. So it has really just taken over so much of what we see on a day-to-day basis. And it has some very negative effects, very negative and serious effects on our body image and how we relate to ourselves. So what is diet culture? Diet culture is a worshiping of thinness and equates it to health and morality. It promotes weight loss as a means of attaining a higher status, which means you feel compelled to spend a massive amount of time, energy, and money trying to shrink your body, even though the research is clear that no one, and I mean no one, can sustain intentional weight loss for more than a few years. And I'll come back to that. Diet culture demonizes certain ways of eating while elevating others, which means you're forced to be hypervigilant about your eating, ashamed of making certain food choices, distracted from your pleasure, your purpose, and your power. It oppresses people who don't match up with its supposed picture of health, which disproportionately harms women, femmes, trans folk, people in larger bodies, people of color, people with disabilities, damaging both mental and physical health. So I'm curious, just to kind of start, if anybody can really resonate with that third bullet point, really elevating types of eating, feeling shame around food, being hypervigilant, distracting from your actual pleasure of eating, and overall your life's purpose. So first question is, what is body image? Does anybody want to kind of give a try? Well, see, this is why.
There you go. No, you're doing great.
Okay, cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
For me, I think that body image, I personally see it as the way that I see myself through my eyes, not necessarily reality, but it's my perception of my body.
Yes, absolutely. Anyone else?
That, and also the way that we have perhaps been trained to see our body image through media, through a certain lens of, you touched on it in the PowerPoint, but through the lens of like, I'm only worthy if I'm a certain size.
Yes, absolutely. And how damaging. I love that. Thank you guys for sharing. Okay. So just as both of you touched on, body image, like you said, is that experience a person has of themselves and their thoughts and feelings that go along with that, and really the sense of being in your body or embodiment. And the skill of being with the changing body is very much a part of the healing process. And what I think is so interesting is really looking at what body image encompasses. It's our thoughts. So again, how we think about our body, our beliefs about our body, our perceptions of how we see ourselves, our feelings about our body, and then our actions. So the way you behave as a result of the perceptual, affective, and cognitive parts of the body image. So this is a little blurry, but I love including this picture because this is all the parts of the brain that affect your body image. So when individuals say to me, or clients say to me, or friends say, oh, it's so superficial. Body image is so superficial. It's like, well, no, it's really not. So many parts of our brain really play into it. And it has a big impact on how we show up in everyday life. Poor body image can significantly affect psychological and physical well-being. Poor body image also keeps people from connecting to their deeper pain and healing because the body doesn't feel safe. This disconnection keeps us from trusting our bodies and giving our bodies what they need to thrive on a daily basis. And as you mentioned, that worthiness really plays into it. And we have been told a lie that our bodies aren't worthy to show up as they are here and now. So we're always feeling like we're playing catch up to say, are we enough yet? Are we enough yet? And, this is just a little bit more of talking about positive body image. It's not always being about thrilled about what your body looks like, of waking up every day and saying, yes, I look amazing. That can be short-lived. but it's more about having respect, acceptance, and compassion for ourselves, and then how we treat ourselves. You know, our bodies are always changing. They're going to be changing. Any living being is changing. If we are not changing, you know, then we're flatlining, and we don't want to be there. So it's amazing that we have a living, breathing, changing body. And again, if we can be with that experience of our changing body, that is absolutely part of the healing process. And it doesn't mean this is easy. It is definitely part, really being able to connect with the normalcy and the humanity of the discomfort of being in a human body, and being able to really see how sometimes when we try to control our body, it's to feel like we can control and to distract from life. And I just want to mention again, your body is not broken or wrong. It is doing its best for you to function on a daily basis, whether you like what it looks like or not. And this last piece, you know, we are always trying to find acceptance, safety, respect on a daily basis. And when we feel like we can't find that, a lot of times we turn towards manipulating our body or manipulating food to find that, because we are told that our body is something that we should be able to control and manipulate. So these are three awesome components of positive body image that I pulled from positive psychology. Self-esteem is a wonderful one, which I'll come back to that in a second. Positive attitude. And what I really appreciated was avoiding these three things: perfectionism, comparing, and being highly critical or judgmental. How many times have you seen media, social media, marketing ads with a airbrushed female, and immediately we go to criticizing and comparing and judging ourselves because we don't look up to that very unattainable beauty myth and standard that, you know, maybe 1% of the world lives in, if not a smaller. And so, you know, when that comparison comes up, it's a great opportunity for us to pause and to ask ourselves if that really is a realistic comparison, or if it's something that just leaves us feeling again like we're unworthy. And again, that third spot is the emotional stability. So having a healthy connection with our thoughts and feelings. So what I really love we look at this and it's talking about self-esteem is number one. And an actual one that I like better is self-compassion. Self-esteem can be fleeting. Self-compassion is much more deep and layered and dynamic. And so when we can kind of use some of these different things like social support, adaptive coping, weight stability, and that weight stability is more talking about when we have a more positive body image, our weight doesn't fluctuate as much because we either are, you know, there's less restricting and binging, there's less yo-yo dieting, there's more of just an acceptance of where we are. So the weight just tends to neutralize. Excuse me. And the fourth one down, respect of body by attending to its needs and engaging in healthy behaviors. And those last two bullet points are talking about really being savvy with what you're consuming on media. Again, when does that comparison come in? When does the judgment come in? When can we really use those comparison and judgment as a red flag to say, hey, look, I'm starting to go into that space that is not healthy. So what would it be like to widen the lens of what we feel like beauty really is? And our next question, what if we nourished ourselves with as much love and attention as we do our favorite plant, pet, or hurting friend? And I love this question because I have not met many women who aren't amazing caregivers, who aren't amazing friends, spouses, you know, sisters, daughters, and we get so good at nourishing other people and attending to their needs that we often are left behind in the dust with our own needs and meeting ourselves with that care and compassion and kindness that we speak with others with. So being able to really turn and flip that around and saying, what if I nourish myself with that same voice, with that same compassionate love and acceptance? what would that really look like? And what would that feel like? Let me know if anyone wants to share. And this is a good one to just kind of sit on too, because it really is an embodied feeling of when we can kind of turn that around towards ourselves.
We ask this question a lot in therapy. What advice would you give a good friend, or, you know, if a good friend came to you with this same scenario or problem, how would you speak to them?
Yeah.
And I think that's so appropriate in learning to speak to ourselves with that same self-compassion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Beautifully said. And you are so right. There is a palpable difference when we tend to talk to others that we, you know, that we love. And yes, so the question is, I love this question, but it does feel a little selfish when I try to implement it. And oh my goodness, yes, I hear that. And I think especially as women, we tend to shy away from that feeling of selfishness. It doesn't really evoke a very whole or a very nice connotation. But what I have found is if we can't learn to really fill our cup first, if we can't really learn to speak with ourselves to the amount of nourishment and compassion that we will other people, then we actually have a difficult time embodying the full range of emotions that come up for others. We can hold space for them, but until we can really allow ourselves to, you know, to really feel what we need to feel, to be able to embody what the range of emotions are, it's going to be really hard for us to really come to others and be open if we're really working from, you know, a full cup. So being able, in a full cup, and I mean like overflowing, like there is no space for anybody else. And a lot of times then if you can relate to this, that's kind of when resentment comes in, where you really don't have the emotional capacity to show up for somebody else, but it's what you're supposed to do. Or you end up, you know, showing up for multiple people in the day, and at the end of the day, you're like, man, I am exhausted. Being able to, in that moment, really come back to, well, you know, how can I speak to myself with a little bit more kindness? What would it feel like to even just put my hand on my chest or my belly and to breathe into that space? And, you know, that to me is, although the selfishness has a negative connotation, I believe there's real power in being able to take back that word selfish and really be able to say it's okay to be selfish sometimes, because it helps me show up for people more fully. So thank you guys so much for sharing. So this is kind of that hard but is really important slide to put in here. And that diet culture is informed by patriarchy and racism. It contributes to our fat-phobic society and our bias for thinness, often by contributing poor researched claims and promises under the guise of health. BMI grossly negatively affects Black people by overestimating fatness, underestimates health risks in Asian communities, and is disproportionately unhelpful to all women, with accuracy of predicting negative health outcomes by 50%. That means, so body mass index is BMI. And any time that we go to the doctor, this is what they still use all throughout healthcare. But what it really actually is only looking at is height and weight. It's not taking into effect, you know, muscularity. It's not taking into effect age. It's not trying to take into effect how active you are. It's not taking in race or your ethnic background. It's not taking into if you're a man or you are a woman. So quickly to your right, you'll see this mathematician and astronomer called Kaitlin 200 years ago actually came up with what we call now BMI as a way to identify the ideal man. And when he was saying ideal man, he literally meant male, white, and European. And, you know, it was used during a time when people of color were seen as subspecies. And it has been continually used, even though Quetelet had this and never wanted it to be used as an individual. It was only met for as a population basis. And yes, Stevie, I agree. My mind was blown when I figured this out as well. He was clear that it wasn't intended to measure body fat, build, or health, and yet it is across the board used in healthcare still today, 200 years later. And what's really interesting is this guy in the 70s and 80s actually looked at ways to measure health. And even though he saw that BMI only worked about 50% of the time, he said, okay, that's fine, that's enough. And kind of pushed it through. And because the NIH, or National Institute of Health, was looking at different ways to commodify or to really use ways of indicating health or not for insurance purposes and life insurance purposes, they kind of kept it moving forward. So in 1995, the NIH used BMI as a way of standardizing obesity. And I put that in quotes because I have a problem with that word, which we will come to. And by 1998, the NIH lowered their threshold for overweight and obesity literally overnight, after suggestion from a drug company, which would benefit from those shift of overweight and obesity, basically going down. Excuse me, so much talking, and I'm not used to this much talking. So we can really see how it became really problematic, how overnight a bunch of Americans were shifted into these categories of obesity and overweight overnight without any health concerns actually changing. So it became pretty problematic. And here I want to point out this very interesting timeline. And as we were kind of speaking, and I believe, Stevie, you mentioned, that at very young ages, we are starting to be very aware of our bodies. At age 3, we already have the sense of this body is mine, that body is yours. By age 5 and 6, the social desire for thinness with females, muscularity with men starts to come out. So that weight bias is already showing there. And then between 5 and 8, the increased desire for thinness really shoots up. In between that 5 to 7 age range is where we can really see if there are worries or increased concern for weight between that 5 to 7 range, that we can already see that there's an increase in dietary restraint by the age of 9. And again, this is supposed to be a helpful tool. It is not made to shame or to evoke. It is just for information and to really be able to be able to use an opportunity for movement forward. Yes, and I'm reading the chat right now. It hurts my heart to hear that that's what happened to you at the doctor's office and with the BMI. It is so outdated and unhelpful and just really problematic. And you'll see why, because that weight shaming is so unhelpful, and it really just doesn't look at our health as a whole. And to be honest, and I don't even think I put it in here, that area of overweight is actually the healthiest of all weight ranges, even though it's quote unquote overweight. So it's a little frustrating that it's still around. So most research articles do not account for compounding factors like socioeconomics, food availability, race, trauma, and most importantly for this work, weight stigma and weight cycling. So that means that a lot of the research that comes on media, it is paid for by large drug companies or oil companies that are looking for a certain outcome. And they often really don't look at the compounding factors that go in, which is how we get really bad misinformation like the obesity epidemic. Weight stigma and weight cycling have been shown to be more detrimental than being in a larger body altogether. Weight stigma affects people in all body sizes, but disproportionately affects individuals in larger bodies. So again, really looking at where are you getting your health information? Unfortunately, our system doesn't help us much, but there is hope. And a couple of statistics that were in the email as well, but 95 to 98% of the time, most dieters will gain back the weight they have lost in 1 to 5 years. And this is just showing that we are not failing the diets. The diets are 100% failing us. Our bodies always want innate autonomy, like a teenager, like a child. They want the autonomy and it wants to stay alive and it does not want to restrict, because your body cannot tell the difference between real starvation and a decision to restrict. Luckily, we are born as intuitive eaters and it can be something that we can relearn, which is amazing. I love this cycle to the right because it really depicts, I know, my own experience with eating when following my eating disorder, when I was allowing myself more flexibility food, which really meant nighttime binging until late in the night and then waking up at 2 in the morning, only to be having to wake up at 5:30 a.m. for practice. And then I would restrict all day long. So I felt like I felt that guilt. I felt that shame. I felt that my body is disgusting. I am not worthy feelings throughout the day. By the end of the night, I would break, because you are getting into that space of biological deprivation, extreme hunger, where your body will work from the biological standpoint to get you the food that it needs. And that's when we feel really out of control around food or feel addicted to food, because there is a restriction in place. And so what happens is, those cravings come up, you feel reduced control. And then that loss of control can lead to overeating, binging, and feeling like you're less stable, which again goes into the guilt and shame. You restrict, you get to that extreme hunger, and so on and so forth. And I'll be interested to hear, who can really relate to that. And so we come to our next question. What has your experience like with restriction been like? Have you experienced that demonizing of the restriction? And it wasn't usually demonizing actually of the restriction or the binging. I'm curious if anybody has had any experience with that.
I can share mine. So I definitely think that in my mind, demonizing the binging for sure. And not necessarily, like, I grew up as a dancer, and there's, I'm 5'9.5" and without a dancer's body. And I think that, for me, it was very much about, well, stay busy enough that you get to a place where, your body will just forget. And then your body doesn't forget. It reminds you. Yes. And then you do go through that cycle. And I think that you kind of, if you grow up, I think that with any habit or any ritual that you learn, it's by who you look to. And this is just something that is we would always talk about from a very early age about like earning your calories and kind of like, well, you worked out really hard, so like you earned that cupcake, or, and I think that that's the piece of, you don't feel the guilt as long as you put in the work to get it, and which is such an American way to think about it in a weird way. Like, yeah.
Yes, it absolutely is American way. Thank you for sharing.
And I've definitely struggled with the same. And I tend to be, I'm a therapist, Kaitlin, and I used to work at an eating disorder clinic. So a lot of my language, I guess, comes from that experience. But I found both for clients, but also for myself, that like the more I engaged in the restriction part, the more that the binge part became like the thoughts about food, it becomes more obsessive, I think. And and then the guilt that you experience the next day contributes to the restriction part. So it's definitely a vicious cycle. And I think like for myself, I'm definitely a more emotional person. And so I think like for people who find that they're more like that their eating ties to their emotions, which I think is a lot of us, it's really easy to fall into the binge piece.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, I thank you for sharing. What I would love to, you guys mentioned some great things that happen. So, what are pretty common in all of, most of our experiences, because it is a biological drive, is that what can happen is, our bodies learn to have certain cues, right? And those cues show up to give our bodies the knowledge that they need to be able to live, to be able to say, hey, there's a tiger coming after you. Those cues are very real. And what happens when we are constantly in that area of restriction is our bodies start to say, oh, and not in restriction, when we constantly are saying no to hunger, our bodies start to learn, oh, that's not a cue that I need. And so it'll actually silence that cue. And what's really unfortunate is then more and more cues will start to silence because you start to feel like it's just not safe to feel certain feelings. Or, a lot of times we go towards restricting food, yes, to change our body sizes, but more to really feel like we're fitting in, because there are things going on in our life that feel really uncomfortable or unstable. And we go to food for that control. And like you mentioned, so, if you can just wait long enough, you think, oh, I'm saving off my hunger, but it comes back with vengeance. And, it really is something where when those feelings of out of control show up, because it feels like it's out of the blue, and we can feel like we're addicted to food, or that we can't control ourselves, or that we have no willpower, which is not the case at all. And I'm really glad you brought up emotional eating, because eating is absolutely emotional. It's what we do at weddings, at births, at graduations, at funerals. It's what we do when we come together as family and friends. And it can be an amazing emotional tool. What can be problematic is, number one, that has been vilified. So now everyone's terrified of emotional eating. And the other aspect of it is, if we have gotten really good at disconnecting from our cues, which also can mean disconnecting with our feelings and emotions, then the eating can feel out of the blue, or like it's uncontrollable, because we don't have the integration or the embodiment of what's really going on in our bodies to be able to feel like I can handle what's coming up. And so that emotionality, or the emotion is food, I really try not to demonize that, because food is an insanely great tool. It is a great distraction, great number. Where it can be problematic is when that is our only coping skill. It is our only tool to pull from. And so what we really want to happen is to say, yes, food is an option, as well as calling a friend, watching a TV show, going for a walk, petting my dog, taking a nap, listening to music. All of these things are also tools that we can use. And the better that we can really get into our bodies and feel like that is safe to do, the more that we can say, oh, usually when I'm sad, I like turning on some music. It's really helpful. Or, being able to really just say that it's okay if I emotionally eat. There are just times when it actually helps, and times that it's going to cause more pain. And yes, people are saying, yes, the restriction is never vilified. It is the binge, because that is where we feel, quote unquote, out of control. And in our society, restriction will always be glorified, even if it is causing anxiety, stress, lots of psychological damage, physical damage. And unfortunately, because again, we come back to media, so many of what we see is actually in the underweight category. That is what we feel like is the norm, or what we should be lifting ourselves to try to be more like. We don't have a healthy way to lose and maintain weight loss. We just don't. As we've seen, the binge and restrict cycle doesn't work, and weight cycling can be very detrimental for health. So why not focus on what we can do to support a wide range of body sizes and to help support all individuals and see all bodies as worthy? So here's another one of the terms, HAES, which is health at every size. And health at every size doesn't mean that all individuals are all healthy at every size. You can have people who are in thinner bodies, larger bodies in the middle who are not healthy. And you do not have to value health. That is a personal choice of what you value as an individual. But what health at every size does mean is there is an opportunity to use healthy behaviors at any size. And that body size alone is a poor indicator of health, which is how we come back to that BMI and going into a doctor's office and feel shame and guilt because they're saying, this is what it says on the BMI without looking at any other health indicators. And why I think it's so important with the work that I do and what I would love to see more of is really for health providers to be asking questions, asking about your story, asking about your past. That is so much more important to me than any statistic or any number or what you look like. And it's really important to take accessibility. It is important to take accessibility into consideration when we're talking about healthy habits, as well as safety and socioeconomics. Those are very important parts of how sometimes healthy and clean eating and all of these words are really geared to a certain socioeconomic class, a certain, typically white, middle to upper class women who can buy the $10 smoothie, who feel like they are innately wrong or need to be fixed, which is definitely across the board, but we can see how it's also been commodified for a certain demographic. And I have to say that it isn't that nutrition isn't important. And yes, it is still important to value health, but we really have to look at health in a more holistic sense and outside of just what your body looks like. And these are a couple quotes that I just absolutely love. And Nori, I know you read this book from Jenna Hollenstein. When the shame and learned helplessness of bias against fat is taken out of the equation, people are free to connect with internal determinants of what, when, and how much to eat, what types of movements their bodies prefer, and what other behaviors they wish to engage in for the purpose of wellness. When free from fat stigma, it is possible for all bodies to achieve health and well-being. And this bottom large quote is taken from a research study that I have read all of, but we will just take a part of it. And what I really am pulling out of this is a review of 21 long-term randomized control studies found that weight loss diets lead to minimal improvement in cholesterol, triglycerides, systolic and diastolic blood pressure, and fasting blood glucose, and that none of these related to weight loss. So basically, these are all, things that we're constantly told. If you lose weight, these numbers will help. What we're actually seeing, and what is less talked about because it's harder to sell, is that, weight stigma, weight cycling, and some of those other really detrimental and stressful things are actually what is causing some of these high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and things like that, as well as the fact that genetics play 70 to 75% in all of this. So how does weight stigma affect health? This is a very powerful quote, I find. Body dissatisfaction, distraction from other life goals, discomfort and distress, dutiful thinking, distrust of the body, disembodiment or disassociation from one's body, and depression. Behavioral harms, including delayed living, delayed healthcare, dieting, disordered eating and exercise, lower levels of physical activity, negative attitudes about sports, lower participation in physical activity among overweight students, more frequent binge eating, increased risk for eating disorders, more likely to have a diagnosis of binge eating disorder, a significant risk factor for depression, low self-esteem, and body dissatisfaction. Let's just take a look at all that this slide encompasses. All of this is from weight stigma. This is not from, from health. This is from being in a larger body. It is from fear of being in a larger body that all of this comes into play. And we can see how every single one of these seeps in to our everyday lives, and there is no getting away from it. We believe, this quote is from Sabrina Strings, who has written an amazing book called Fearing the Black Body. She said, "We believe in biodiversity seemingly in every other aspect of life except for when it comes to weight. How come worldwide we expect men and women and Europeans and Africans and Asians to all maintain the same weight? That just doesn't make logical sense." And she goes on to talk about that it is absolutely a effect of white supremacy. And I love saying, we don't ask pit bulls to look like a Great Dane or an apple to look like a banana. So why is it so difficult for us to accept a diverse range of body sizes? And this quote to the right came from a book called The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf, which I absolutely love. "A culture fixated on female thinness is not an obsession about female beauty, but an obsession about female obedience. Dieting is the most potent political sedative in women's history. A quietly mad population is a tractable one." So now I'm curious, how does the language you use about your own body impact you? How does it impact the way you nourish yourself through food? Is anybody open to sharing? By the way, I love this chat going on the side.
Morgan, you can go on mute if you'd like. Off of mute. Or not. That's cool.
Totally fine. Stevie, did you want to share? We can totally move on.
Listen, I'm vulnerability city over here. I'll give you an example of this weekend. We took a family trip and we were at a pool. And by the way I'll explain it, you'll get a sense of like the way that I think about things. I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, like desperately seek external validation, right? And that's a whole part of like my journey and story about going to the pool. And it happened to be like a really big tennis tournament, and there's a bunch of South African, Australian, like 6'2" supermodels, it kind of felt like, right? Like the traditional version of beauty. And I'm walking around in my bathing suit, already incredibly uncomfortable. And if you guys read the newsletter a couple weeks ago, you already know that like I'm very uncomfortable in being in a bathing suit. And so, I'm sitting here, like go into the bathroom thinking, oh my gosh, my cellulite, I've got like my, chest is out. Like I've got things that are in like literally looking in the mirror and nitpicking everything. And, I walk around the corner and my son just wants me to be in the pool and play. And that's all he wants to do is just play with his mom and like I think that it's one of those things you put into perspective of like, you showed up and you were in a bathing suit and like you're beating the shit out of yourself for this, and none of that why does that even matter? You're looking around and you're never going to see any of these people ever again. Why do you care? And I think that that's the piece for me of like, I just don't, it's so ingrained to like the comparison of how we look at other people versus our own worthiness, when really that's actually like, nobody's going to put your measurements on your tombstone and nobody's going to remember that piece of you. So it just doesn't really matter. I don't know. It's just this is a really interesting journey for me in particular. Not unlike a lot of other areas, but I think this one's just so deep seated for women as a whole. I am really interested to hear what other people have to say for sure.
I'm new. I'm Melissa. I think part of this for me is I fight against myself. So like back in my 20s and 30s, I was really, really, really thin, really athletic, doing triathlons and things like that. And then I went through menopause all of a sudden, like super early. I mean, I'm only 44 and I'm almost pretty much through it at this point. And I packed on like 30 pounds in a year or so. And now I can't do like sports wise, I'm starting to fail in terms of that a little bit. And so my age, I think, is becoming a factor. But I can't get rid of that 30 pounds. So when I look at myself, I'm like, where did I go? Because it happened so fast. And a lot of it's genetic, and a lot of it is, I quit doing triathlons, but now I couldn't do one if I tried. You know what I mean? So I can't get that 30 pounds to come back off. So I'm constantly, nobody else really cares. But as I walk around, I'm not happy with what I look like, but nobody else, nobody else would say that there's a problem there. But when I look, that's what I see, because I'm used to that 120 pound, like super lean body. And when I look in the mirror, I'm like, well, none of these clothes fit anymore. I don't even look like myself, to me. So I think that's my biggest thing. So when I go to eat, I do a lot of like carb restriction, because I am struggling with the menopause too. And the way you process carbs is, part of what I've heard can be a challenge. But I'm looking like it doesn't even matter what I do. And for me, being someone who absolutely adores food, like food is not sustenance for me. Food is a magical experience. Like if I had a decent palate, I'd be a chef. I just don't have a palate for it. So it's killing me slowly to look and like restrict what I'm eating, because I can't get rid of it. Like, because I'll pop weight on quick, like super quick, because I have low thyroid as well. And so that contributes to like me gaining weight quickly. So I just walk around trying to figure out what to do all the time, because I want to eat. Like, I love the eating. I could take a whole vacation with eating.
Yes, Melissa, thank you so much for sharing. That is, you are definitely not alone in that experience. And, I haven't gotten to the point in my life, but I have talked to many people who have, and, and feel free, anybody else who wants to chime in. What you are experiencing is, and Stevie, you too, what this is there is such a massive pressure on females to look a certain way. And that is because for so long in our society, the way we looked was our worth. It is, it's really what's put forward. And the really difficult thing about body image, or how we see ourselves, is if we have so much worth in how we look, it almost waters down everything else that we have to offer the world. And you are definitely not alone with, that experience of really feeling like it's not even comparing you to other people, it's you comparing yourself to a past self. And that person is, a lot of times what we do is we over glorify that person without really remembering what else went into, what was it like to be, in that body? What was the work? Do you even want to continue to do triathlons at that capacity anymore? And unfortunately, we live in an ageist society where we're not really seeing real, true female bodies as they go through menopause, as they change, as they, as we get more of a bellies, because that is something that we are told that we are supposed to be shameful of. And it, in the end, distracts from our power, our empowerment, our ability to show up as is. And the hardest part is, at the end of the day, we can see it's a mental choice. But when we go back to that timeline of it's, 3 years old, you start to already be wanting to kind of measure towards that thinness. It takes a lot to really disentangle and to change those habitual patterns of thinking and worthiness, to really be able to turn towards ourselves with compassion. And Melissa, I am, again, pastry chef for 5 years, and I absolutely love food. And so I so feel how sad that would be not to be able to experience that part of your life that you enjoy so much. And what I would really like to kind of ask you and you all to really be able to look at, at what cost are you willing to go to really get to this beauty standard that we all feel like we should live by? And yes, we can see the statistical extremes. Yes, we can see people who are, 80 years old doing triathlons, and that's good and great for them. But, the moment, again, that comparison and that judgment comes in, it really takes away from our actual living and takes us out of our present moment, which is the most important thing. again, like Stevie, you said, being, your son running to you, who just wants you to hop in the pool, who sees no difference between you and a 6'2", volleyball player, who, again, as an athlete, there are plenty of girls that I looked at, I'm like, my goodness, you are the picture of beauty. They have just as much, body image issues, if not more. And you never know what's going on the inside. You never know what's going on at home. You never know what unhealthy habits are really going on. And so, I just advise again to really take a look at what costs are you willing to go to. And this actually brought me up to another point, Maggie, that you brought up that I would like to touch on, is those moments when our bodies are, even when we've cued down our hunger, fullness cues, our body has a great ability of showing up in other ways to tell us we're hungry. The obsessive body checking, the obsessive thoughts around food. There's a great study called Minnesota Starvation Study with a group of men where they were in their 20s, early 30s, and they started looking at cookbooks. They lost their sex drive. They tried to leave the facility to go get milkshakes and were kicked out, all because they were put on 1,700 calories, which is craziness now, because at women, we're told, 1,000 calories, which is just not sustainable. So our bodies are amazing at giving us other cues, lightheadedness, foggy thinking, all of these things that are great indicators of your body will push and push and push until it gets the sustenance and the nourishment it needs.
Kaitlin, we in our book club a couple months ago, we read Untamed by Glennon Doyle. And one of the things that all of us noticed was this story about when she had a bunch of adolescent kids at her house, girls and boys. Yeah. And she asked the whole group, "Are you guys hungry?" And all of the boys were like, yeah, pizza, whatever. And the girls just sort of sat there and then looked at each other. Yeah. And, our group was really commenting on how, as males, well, I'm not a male. Males are socially trained to look inside themselves and say, am I hungry? And intuitively eat. Whereas females are trained to look around and question, am I hungry? I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't say that, maybe if no one else is hungry, I better not be hungry. And I think we all have that journey, like everyone's journey is different, and it changes obviously throughout your lifetime and your hormones and all, your phase of life. But I remember reading this quote years back, and this sort of was like a shift for me. And I don't remember the exact quote. I tried to look it up, but I couldn't find it. But it's something along the lines of like, what could women accomplish if they didn't spend so much time worrying about body image? Yeah. And that really struck me, because I was like I was empowered and I was confident in certain aspects of my life, but not in others. And I was like, man, if I spent, half the time that I spend thinking about food and body image, if I put that towards like the greater good or my career or my goals or whatever it is that I'm looking to accomplish, man, I could be pretty great. And that for me was like a shift. And I found that the more that I took care of like my mental health and my own empowerment, the easier it got to not emotionally eat.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's one of my favorite quotes as well. And that experience from Untamed is, it really does show how deeply ingrained it is in all of our heads, and that because women are the caretakers too, we're not supposed to put ourselves first. And so we learn at an early age to look to our parents to how much are we supposed to eat, or, what's okay. And we lose ourselves in that process. Absolutely. And I totally agree. I think sometimes we get or fixate on this idealized version of ourselves. And again, our bodies are going to shift and change throughout our life. But the more that we put shame or guilt on ourselves, that's where it's a lot harder to get curious and compassionate. And so the more we can kind of get to that place of my body's allowed to shift, I have more to offer to this world, even if you're in pain, even if, you know, you have underlying factors, it's how can I optimize how I'm living on a day-to-day basis? And I bet you anything, it isn't, you know, restricting or limiting how you're nourishing your body. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Let's see. What else do we have here? So getting into more of the food, which we've kind of touched on a little bit, but have you ever noticed the more you say no to certain foods or food groups, the more you are drawn to them and end up eating in a distracted, joyless, and guiltful state? Did you even taste the food? Were you there for it? Or was it to a point where you ended up numbing out and distracting because either you were biologically hungry and needed to get to enough, your brain is very good at when you get to that state of primal hunger, it will shut down everything else so that it will get enough food. Again, we're back to that binge restrict cycle of getting to that state of extreme hunger. It can be scary and it can feel like very out of control when in reality, it's your body trying to do best by you. And what happens if you actually allowed yourself to eat the food that you want in the moment and it would taste satisfying? So what would this look like? Instead of saying no, 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 over and over and over to the chocolate chip cookie that just looks amazing, it sounds like exactly what you want, and you change your mind, you say, no, I'm going to eat the carrots, I'm going to eat the, low fat ice cream, I'm going to have, the carrot sticks, I'll make, a banana and peanut butter. And then you go through eating all of these foods and you're still not satisfied. And so then you go to eat the cookie and it's still not satisfying because now you're overly full. Now you've missed the mark completely. And what can be really incredible, and I'm sure you guys have had this experience of when you actually allow yourself to eat the food that you want in the moment in a timely manner, we have an ability to really sit there and enjoy and luxuriate. And it ends up almost being an act of self-care, so that we don't want to eat certain foods when we're not completely craving them because they'll miss the mark because it's not as enjoyable. And what's really amazing to experience is when we're actually allowing ourselves to find the satisfaction, the amount of food that we need is very different. We're not going into it with guilt or in that very vulnerable state of hunger where it takes 10 candy bars to get to. We can have a much more reasonable amount, and it actually feels satisfying because we're embodied and we're in tune with what our body is saying. There is a natural point in eating called habituation, where basically our bodies and our taste buds start to say, okay, I've had enough of that. And the satisfaction and the availability to taste the food isn't really there anymore. And so what we can really decide in that moment is, if I actually give myself full permission to have this food when I want it, when it sounds satisfying, do I really want to continue eating it right now when it doesn't taste as good? Or do I want to wait until that opportunity comes up? And that really brings us to the act of distraction, which distraction, whether it's, eating, I catch myself doing it too, guys. It is not that I am a whiz at this or an expert by any means. I talk about this, but it is still work. And it is still something that I use red flags all the time to help support myself. It is still active compassion. It is still an act of learning. But distracted eating can look like you're watching TV while you're talking to your partner, while you're, running around with your kids, while you're on your phone, while you're trying to do emails, while you're, really just fitting in lunch to the, while you're working because you don't want to give yourself an actual lunch break. And what happens is our bodies aren't able to actually see that we can do two things at once, but we can't have two thoughts at once. So what happens is we end up either your body is focusing on the eating or it's focused on the emails. It's focused on the eating or it's focused on social media. And we aren't able to actually get into that really sound state of relaxation for digestion. So it's really hard for our bodies to mentally see that, okay, we're eating. And number two, it's a different digestion for our body, which is something really interesting to think about. And again, kind of coming back to that, what are you aware of what your emotional vulnerabilities are? So when you get to that biological hungry, when you're overly stressed, overly tired, overly anything really, those are the moments of emotional vulnerability where a lot of times we go towards food. And we've touched on emotional eating. And again, I want to make sure that you hear that I am not demonizing emotional eating. Eating is emotional. It's just when that's our only tool for coping that it can be detrimental. So let me touch on a couple of my favorite things is really to take a look at guilt is not a requisite for enjoying and finding pleasure in eating. I don't know how many conversations I have had of people feeling like they need to earn their food. Again, we talked about, moving to burn calories. You're not only taking the enjoyment out of food, you're taking the embodiment out of food, you're taking the joy out of movement, you're taking the embodiment out of movement. Because you've now brought this all together as something that is bad or is wrong or you need to earn. The fact that you're alive means that you need to eat. Satisfaction is a body feeling, and it is not like guilt, which is a thought or a head feeling. So instead, satisfaction is a body feeling instead of a mind thought that takes over. So the more that we can actually get out of our heads and into our bodies, the more capacity we actually have to get out of that fear or the fight or flight cycle and to really choose what we need in an integrative manner. And I love this quote, don't let your mind bully your body. And I'm going to slide through these so we can get through to the talking portion of this. And I'm curious, so what has been your experiencing with dieting or restricting or limiting certain food groups? Does it bring you closer to or farther away from yourself? And I get it. I do not blame the individual for wanting to diet, but can we ask ourselves if it will give us what it promises, and will a smaller body actually solve all our problems? Food can be an amazing part of life, as we've talked about, if we can allow the food hierarchy to be stripped away, taking away from food shaming. Morality does not need to be in food. Good, bad, guilty. All of those words give us this food hierarchy of clean, not clean, even process, not process. You buy bagged chopped lettuce from the grocery, that is processed food still. And I understand there is a spectrum, but the more that we can take morality out of food, the more that we can put food on an even basis, and that allows us to actually come back to saying, what would be satisfying? In this moment, what would be the most satisfying option for me? And sometimes that's going to be carrot cake. Sometimes that's going to be a carrot. They just have a different micronutrients and macronutrient breakdown. And our bodies are insanely intelligent. And I know we have been told, and we a lot of times believe that we can't trust our bodies, but the more that we can actually be embodied, the more that we have an opportunity to let our bodies eat the variety of foods that they want to eat. And coming into intuitive eating is about taking us back to what we fundamentally knew when we were born. However, the older we get, the more external factors determine when, how much, and what types of food we're consuming. Certain rules, restrictions, and values are put on food, stopping that intuitive sense. When we come back to intuitive eating, we're slowly reviving those internal cues, hunger, satiety, satisfaction, in a way that works with the body instead of against it. So these are the 10 principles of intuitive eating, and this is what I am certified in and teaching a lot of. Sometimes we actually talk about the exact principles. Sometimes we just breeze by them. They are not a set of rules. This is not a diet. And so I am constantly reminding clients and people that I talk to about intuitive eating, it is not black and white. This is finding gray area. This is finding what works for you. This is allowing yourself to go over the line of fullness to know where the exact line is. It's about really challenging the food police. What are those rules and beliefs that you have ingrained in your head? What does it mean to find satisfaction in food? What does it mean to use to cope with your emotions without just food? What would it even mean to respect your body? What would it mean to find joyful movement? What would it mean to honor your hunger and to reject the diet mentality? What would food freedom look like for you? And I hear you, and going back to that, that selfish and negative connotation of this, but maybe it's harder to allow your current self to find that respect and compassion you deserve. But what would it be like to really look at that little girl version of you who just wants to be loved, who just wants to be accepted? Can you speak to her? And what would your answer be? If she wants to eat freely, if she wants to know that she is safe in her ever-changing body, if she is safe to make decisions that empower her, that help her feel nourished in the day so that she can conquer the world, what would you say to that little girl version of yourself? And I do this all the time with clients. How can you speak to yourself in more compassionate, and if compassionate is too fluffy, kindness, friendliness? How can you speak to yourself again, to that little version of yourself who just wants to be loved and accepted?
Hey,
Yeah.
Kaitlin.
Yes.
Back to those principles a minute.
Yeah.
Speaking as a world-class gold medalist emotional eater,
Yes.
like, I don't think I've probably been hungry since 1972.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of that principle, to honor your hunger, and principle 6, fill your fullness.
Yeah.
And if you never, how do you even begin to do intuitive eating if you're not sure what true hunger? You've talked to us how the body will, reject restrictions.
Yep.
So how do you get back to knowing when you're truly hungry, and not by looking at the clock like it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner time?
Yes, absolutely. That is a great question. It is nuanced, and it is for each individual. How I start people on is with honoring hunger. Is basically, I have a scale and if anybody wants the scale, I'd be happy to send it over to you. It's basically starting from 1 to 10. And 1 is that ravenous primal hunger. 10 is like Thanksgiving Day full. I need to unbutton my pants. I feel nauseous. Don't look at me. Don't talk to me. Don't touch me. And so what we really are trying to find, and again, this is not a perfect system. It's on, generally speaking, we're trying to stay between those 4 and 6 numbers. Basically meaning we are getting to a point where we are satisfied and able to say, okay, I would like to be able to go for a walk after this, and I feel like I can still do that. Or even in this moment, like, hey, I need to, I know that I have a 4-hour meeting coming up. So eating right now is self-care. So maybe I'm going to step over that 6, maybe towards a 7, knowing that I'm going to need to be full for a little bit longer. So staying like close to those numbers is our ability to be able to actually still cue into what's going on. And these are subtle cues. I absolutely hear you. It took me some time to really reassociate with my hunger cues, especially if you've had disordered eating or you dieted in the past. Disordered eating, hunger can feel scary. It can feel something that you're not supposed to feel. It can feel something that you're supposed to push away, or it can be something that you glorify. Yes, I'm feeling hungry. Keep going. Don't stop. So what we really want to do is find more of the nuances of hunger. And again, what does that look like? It looks like being able to say, I'm starting to feel a little bit, I'm getting a little bit foggy in my head, or I'm having a hard time concentrating. Sometimes it is the butterflies in the stomach. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling like I'm thinking about food a lot. So all of these things, a lot of times we demonize some of these feelings, but they are very important indicators for our hunger. And what I will often ask clients to do, and this is, again, very much depends on the client, but sometimes we will set up a very flexible eating plan. And what we're actually doing, and this is for people who have just a very hard time focusing in on those hunger cues, we will basically set up a plan so that, number 1, they know what's coming. There is no questioning. They know exactly what to expect. Number 2, we are re-regulating their system. when you have a dysregulated system, it is very hard to feel those hunger and fullness cues. So by setting up a structured plan, you're able to really say, okay, I know what to expect. Maybe after a week or two, you're starting to notice like, man, after breakfast, I kind of start getting these inklings of I'm thinking about food a lot. I'm not really noticing anything in my stomach yet, but man, I start to really hone in on food. So maybe this is an opportunity for me to take a look and say, maybe I need to eat a little bit more breakfast, or maybe I need to bump lunch down a little bit, or maybe I need a snack. And so these are some of the ways that we can really work through the hunger piece. Fullness is similar. If you have gone over that line, we need to reestablish what that line is for you based on what you need in that moment. And again, I want to reiterate, sometimes it doesn't feel safe to come back to these hunger fullness cues at first. So maybe we don't even start there. Maybe we are starting with awareness of our surroundings. How can we say there's a plant next to me? Stop at the storyline. Just there is a plant here. There is awareness in that. Grounding into our feet. What does it feel like when my feet are relaxed? What does it feel like when my feet are not relaxed? And being able to work through some of those external perceptions, the body cueing, so that it starts to be more safe to actually play into some of the more subtle cues of the body. And I promise you, the more you get comfortable doing that, the more that your body will show up into it. Nothing is broken. It's just reestablishing the dysregulation.
Yeah.
I am somebody who didn't eat breakfast for decades, and it is amazing to me every morning when my body within the first hour is like, yes, breakfast, we're eating breakfast. And it is like, has to happen on point or I am hangry and cranky.
It sounds a little bit like mindfulness for your body.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is, yes. And intuitive eating aligns with mindfulness. The biggest changes, the biggest differences are these principles are actually very well researched and go in a lot into psychology. The other difference is rejecting the diet mentality, which is a really important one, and joyful movement. And so those kind of go further than the mindfulness, but they are very much work in tandem.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. So again, that's right. So this is actually our last slide, which is perfect timing. These are some questions that you can screenshot. Again, I can send these over to you if they would be helpful. But really, how can we support ourselves and others in this healing process? Normalize these conversations. So normalize these conversations. I think I skipped over reading a Brene Brown quote that you cannot shame people into long-lasting change. You can't do it. But when we feel shame, it makes us feel very isolated and alone. You are not alone in these feelings. I bet you anything, you talk to most women on the street, random women, friends, colleagues, family members, they are going to have similar experiences. Maybe not the exact same, but similar. We all live in the same culture, and we all have really these distorted views ingrained into us. And so the more that we can normalize these conversations, the more that shame has no space, because shame wants us to believe we're the only ones. The more that we normalize, the more it's not a big deal. The more that we're like, yeah, I don't always love my belly, but my belly is what, where I hold so many emotions. It's where I am able to, hold myself. It's where I hold so much of my power if we're talking about chakras. It's where, really we start to see how some of these deep-rooted beliefs aren't ours. They are a society viewpoint. And it's funny where, females' power are so much in our bellies. It's where we hold life. And that's exactly what's demonized. So it's really interesting to take a look at that. Excuse me. And so we can see, these questions are, oh, excuse me, so much talking. I promise it's not COVID. So normalizing these conversations and really being able to further ask ourselves some of these questions. Where does the come in? Where does the guilt come in? Where do I feel like I'm breaking a rule? Is it my own voice or somebody else's? Where are assumptions being made? Where can I choose joy, respect, satisfaction? A lot of these questions are really getting into, again, embodiment and really questioning some of these societal rules that we really can break to feel like it does not matter what shape and size you're in. You have full power to show up in your here and now body. It is just ingrained in us that we aren't allowed to feel that power. We don't deserve to feel that power. And again, kind of coming back to that idea that we're always serving others, how can we be more friendly, kind, compassionate towards ourselves? Where can we use boundaries? Where can we use mundane self-care? So I use mundane self-care as there is a luxury self-care and there's mundane self-care. That is the, going to the doctor, having a clean house if you want a clean house, putting time aside for yourself to breathe, meditate, read, journal. What am I prioritizing and what are my non-negotiables? What are those healthy boundaries that help me be able to actually connect with myself and better show up for myself in different circumstances? Again, coming back to this question of what if we nourish ourselves with as much love and attention as we do our favorite plant, our pet, our hurting friend, the younger version of ourselves? If it is too difficult to talk to our here and now selves, can you talk to younger version of yourselves who just wants to be loved, who just wants to be cared for, nourished, and accepted? Again, thank you so much. This is my email, website, social media. If you have any further questions or you want to answer anything off of this Zoom call, please feel free to reach out to me. I would absolutely be happy to touch base, to hear from you. And let's go ahead and see if anybody has some questions while I continue to cough and grab some water really quick.
Yes, get some water and get hydrated.
Yeah, I'll be right back. Hang on just a second.
No worries. So I would be interested, if we're having these conversations, you can put questions into the chat. I know that it's a vulnerable conversation and a place to be. You can also even send a chat directly to me in private, and I can read your question. If you don't want me to read your name, I'm totally comfortable with that. But I think that as Kaitlin and I had conversations kind of leading up to this, and I know that as a group we've talked a lot about our dealing with trauma and dealing with the way that things kind of manifest themselves, right? So what you resist will persist, and it will find ways to manifest itself in other ways. And some of that resolved pieces, I think that that's something that as we talk about the control piece that really resonates with me is when you start to feel, and we've had a lot of conversations as Kaitlin, as a group about when you lose control during COVID right now and you feel out of control, you're seeking to control only what you can control, which is yourself. And it's there's a physical external indicator, right? For me of like a mirror or clothes size or what else did I put here? Being the scale. Gosh, and you hop on it and you're kind of like, okay, I can control this. Like I can get myself in check here. But I think that there's just so much to consider in terms of actually managing your emotions during this time and giving yourself some, I don't know. I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that, because I think for me, I think I am in a space where I acknowledge that it's not just about the external validation piece. It's for me, I want to live a long, healthy life too. And society has told me maybe it's the messages are, okay, if you eat these certain things, if you eat, this many calories, and if the calories are these clean foods, and if you work out this much, and if you have this BMI, all of those things combined means you'll live forever. Yes. And so I would love to just hear you more talk about like that piece of it first, and then we can get it. Maybe that sparks conversation for other people.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great place to start. I think so many of us want that longevity, and it's totally understandable. And a lot of people start on this work of wanting to manipulate their diet or change their bodies for health reasons. And that I absolutely understand that, because that is something, if it is something that you value, then it's definitely, an area where you can kind of dip your toes in. What is difficult is our brains love numbers, love numbers. So when we are looking at the size of clothing, or we're looking at the scale, what it does is, with those indicators, even BMI, that in and of itself is external validation or invalidating. And so what happens is, instead of actually checking in with how am I feeling today, if on a holistic level, how am I physically feeling, emotionally feeling, do I feel like I have enough energy to get through the day? Am I, overly stressed? Am I working on my boundaries? All of those things, we can get really wrapped up into, what is the scale telling me today? I'm hopping on the scale in the morning, and if it is up at all, then it is a bad day. And those external indicators aren't always actually helpful for how we're living our lives or how we're showing up in our daily lives. Especially right now, when we all are trying to seek control, when everything feels so out of control and it feels like nobody knows what's going on. It's understandable that we're reaching for those things, not only to control, but to distract. Those distractions are so helpful, because it can feel really overwhelming to really feel the immense pain that is in discomfort that's going on right now. And although that control, or using those external indicators, can be helpful in the moment, they actually end up being more detrimental in the long run, because they cause an disembodiment. Meaning that we're always looking for the external to tell me, am I doing well, or am I not? Am I on the wagon? Am I off the wagon? Do I need to restrict more? Do I need to? And so if we're looking at, again, the scale, that, yes, maybe it's food. No, maybe it's not food. Maybe it's cortisol levels. Maybe we're going through a global pandemic. Maybe you need to give yourself a little bit of more grace right now. Maybe it's age, or it's hereditary, or it's hormones fluctuating. There are so many other factors, but I think because we hone in so much on weight, that we feel like it's just something that we can control. And again, statistics show we can't. We honestly can't, in a healthy, sustainable way.
And I think that one thing that you've posted a lot about, especially in your support of Black Lives Matter, but I think beyond even and taking it a step further, about making sure that what we are surrounding ourselves with, diet isn't just about food, it's about the other things that we're taking in. And I love that you take that to that level, because if we're scrolling and we've curated our social media, and if we're watching things on TV, and the things that we're consuming are full of this, perpetuating the issue of this version of beauty that is completely unattainable. I know that since I've come to know you and follow you, I've started to follow people, and not in comparison. Like I ask my why a lot. You've really provoked me to ask, why am I looking at this? And it's not that I'm following people because I feel better than them, right? I'm filling my feed full of things that allow for me to understand that the woman that I'm looking at is so beautiful because of the work that she's doing, and it's incredible. And I look to her, and it's because of the joy that she's evoking that she's beautiful. And it's I think it's helping me to step beyond this perpetuation of patriarchal society's view of what that looks like, because I will never be happy if I'm trying to chase that and consume that. So how do I better curate my life to support that not being a thing that I value anymore?
Yes.
So
yes, absolutely. I love that so much. And as you said, I mean, what we view in as beauty, and I'm sure those of us who are a little bit older have seen it change. I mean, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, now it's, you know, we can look at, there was the heroin chic phase. There was Twiggy back when, who was actually, she was named Twiggy for a reason. Now to what we're looking at is more like, okay, you need to be big boobs, big butt, but abs. You know, you need to be toned. You need to look like you go to the gym all the time, but not like you really try hard. And so it's ever changing. So if we're really going about what societal's view is of beauty, we're always going to be screwed in the end. So, you know, what I love is, you know, and kind of going back to also those indicators of health. If we know that weight loss isn't sustainable, what would happen if we take off that cap and we said everything else? You know, what would you do if it wasn't done for weight loss? Kind of like my question before. What would you do if your fear of weight wasn't there? What changes would you make? What decisions would you make? What would your whys be? And what I really encourage people to do, and I know sometimes it's hard, but with social media, it's pretty easy to start saying, can I start seeing and can I start broadening my lens of what I'm looking at? Because I bet you anything, you know, you go to a teenage girl and what is she looking at? She's looking at Instagram models. She's looking at like visco people. She's looking at like TikTok even, you know, all of that is looking at a certain body type. And when we can really open up our eyes to different bodies and actually normalize normal people's bodies, it really empowers us to be able to see how much we can really show up in our day-to-day lives in the body that we are in now. And as you said, there are so many women in all different body sizes doing amazing things. You know, I follow multiple women in fat bodies, and I don't say that negatively. I say it with, you know, as an adjective. Just as tall and short. They are, you know, doing these amazing yoga poses, running marathons, doing so many things that we think that those bodies shouldn't be able to do. And the reality is there is, you know, a wide range of bodies out there that are able to do amazing things. We just often curate our feed to a small portion of those. So the more that we can broaden that lens and to really get some of these conversations going online too, and not just white bodies, you know, people of color, Latino, Asian, you know, and not just, you know, one type of, like, there's so many different kinds of people out there. And again, the more that we can broaden that up, the more that we really give ourselves space to really see what that looks like.
I would think there would be other indicators as well, like outside of societal indicators. Like Stevie, you asked about some of the external stuff, but I'm wondering, like, instead of the scale or instead of like clothing fitting a certain way, if we used like our cholesterol and our like blood pressure and some of those things that like can really speak to being a healthy human and taking care of your body, even if you don't fit that impossible image of like what we think we're supposed to look like.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's, oh, go ahead. Were you going to
No,
say?
I was gonna say, Maggie, on that, I've often wondered just about the benefit, the energy, you know, because I'm in my mid-60s. So it's like sometimes I say to myself, oh, okay, you know, you are working a lot and you are 60s and you do have a lot on your plate. And yet I want more energy. And I'm trying to figure out, sometimes I'll say to myself, well, if you weren't overweight, you'd have more energy. You know, I mean, I say that all the time. And so, you know, I sometimes I do believe if you live long enough, you do believe your own bullshit after a while, you know. But
yes, absolutely. And it's so interesting how easily our bodies become the scapegoat for everything.
yeah.
It is because, again, we are told that it is controllable.
Right.
And the reality is, again, if we could take weight and put it on the back burner and say, what other things might we do to bring us more vitality, to give us more energy? And yes, blood indicators can be absolutely helpful. Cholesterol is the one where I have like a little bit, because it is so hereditary and it has been touted for so long as a food issue and for so long as a fat issue, as in food fat. And so, which is just not true. It has a lot more to do with hereditary things, but, you know, again, being able to just use different indicators of really, how is your sleep? Are you getting enough water? There's a great research article that basically took people from all ranges of sizes and found 4 things that made a difference. And it really came down to not smoking, increasing your intake of fruit and vegetables, finding joyful movement, and limiting alcohol or drinking not in excess. Those were the 4 things. That's it. And they found no matter what weight you were at, it was helpful for all of those indicators. And it's an amazing thing to see. Well, it's not saying taking out food, it's saying what can we add in? We're always in this thought of what can we remove? What can we remove? What can we remove? And it's, you know, I really like thinking about, because restriction is so tricky and our autonomy wants to work against that. What does it really look like to start to say, what can we add to our lives instead of take away? This isn't Lent, you know, we're trying to really add vitality. We're trying to see how can we help support ourselves. And that's a great way to kind of be able to do it, is what can I add in? Let's see, I can go over to our side question. Do you have any tips for finding joyful movement without feeling guilt about what we should be doing? Yes, I do. I definitely do. You know, movement is one of those things, again, that has been commodified. And, you know, I think as Americans, we have a very difficult relationship with movement. Again, I was an athlete. I love moving, but there is a point where moving becomes detrimental. And say we have a stressful day at work. If our cortisol levels are shot up the roof, it is not a good idea to go to a HIIT boot camp workout. It is actually going to increase our cortisol levels more, which increases our stress, which causes more damage than good in our bodies. So what is a better option there? Going for a gentle walk, doing some yoga, doing some breathing exercises, going home and reading a book. I hear that guilt coming out, and it's something that I had to work through myself, because it's this perpetual feeling of like, no, it's something that I should be doing. And what I like to change should to is have to do. Do I have to work out? Well, no, you don't have to work out. And when we can actually allow ourselves to, again, come back to a more embodied way of moving, of really just starting by asking ourselves, what would be enjoyable to do right now? What does my body need? What would be rejuvenating? Because in the end of the day, movement is supposed to be to actually add to our lives and not take away from. It is not supposed to leave us exhausted. It's not supposed to leave us feeling depleted. It is supposed to add to our lives. And yes, are there times where you're like, man, I really don't feel like moving right now? Yes, absolutely. But the more that you can really get embodied with what your body needs, the more we'll able to better see, do I not want to move, but I would benefit from a little bit of movement? Or is this just one of these times where I need to say that's not what is best for me right now? And the more we can really honestly answer those questions without fear of our body changing, the more that we really get in tune with what feels good for our body. Sometimes it's going to be a HIIT workout. Sometimes it's going to be Pilates or yoga or a walk. Sometimes it's going to be stretching. Sometimes we've just been sitting all day, and getting some movement in our joints is exactly what we need. And so the more we can kind of switch the should to have to, or be able to say, if movement is something that you are prioritizing in that day, be able to really say, this is be able to change it from should to I am prioritizing this, or being able to just shift that perspective a little bit. And, you know, I understand because we are in a Fitspo culture online. And I think, again, it really changes how we see certain things. Being able to really allow ourselves to say, you know, yes, maybe back 10 years ago, I used to run marathons, but my knees hurt now. Well, can we then be more compassionate with ourselves and more loving and friendly with ourselves and say, is there something that is more realistic for me right now? And doing it without shame, with doing it without guilt, and really allow ourselves to ask ourselves those questions. So I hope that helped. And are there any other questions? I'm trying to look through the list to see if there's anything else on there. I think we covered them all.
Yeah, I think that for me, there's so much to just unpack with. It really is, it's so much unlearning and just constantly putting and intercepting yourself at every moment when I'm kind of unpacking, like peeling back and unpacking and asking and getting to the why, right? And I think that once we can start to understand more about why we are doing this and understanding that it's really gets, I know it sounds silly to me. You shifted it from self-esteem to what? Self-compassion. Yes. I love that, because I think that you're absolutely right. Self-esteem comes with just a lot, again, like there's a lot of overuse when it comes to that, and empowerment and all of those things. I think that if we can also acknowledge that because the diet culture and the industry, I want everybody to leave this understanding that there is no mechanism in place that de-incentivizes anyone to walk away from that. Mm-hmm. And I just want everybody to understand that when you think about money and you think about power, not to get on the cinema second, okay, just like for a minute. But I mean, having worked for a large corporation before, there is nothing that de-incentivizes anyone to not do this. Like there's no perk. Why would you do it? It makes money and it makes people feel good and makes people feel like they're advancing themselves. It's harder work to actually look inside and understand that why you're doing this to yourself and why you're putting yourself through this. And it's harder work to shift society's culture of beauty because you're really unpacking a lot of that. And I think that if you can just remember that it has to start with somewhere, and you hope that younger version of yourself, that Maggie, I know, touching on like, what would you do with the time that you weren't thinking about, you weren't thinking about like all the people at the pool and looking at everybody at the pool, you could be really truly present and in the moment. Right. And, I think that piece of it is really, as we're thinking about unlocking the best version of ourselves, using that mental energy for something that really can change your life, and putting the energy towards something else, I think is the part that I just wish for everybody. Because I think it could really make a huge change. Yeah.
Yes, I absolutely echo that. And it's, another question that I like to ask is what is the motivator, or what is the driver? What is the driver to have you reaching for restriction, reaching for weight loss? And that really forces you to ask a deeper question there, to really get more introspective, to have that awareness of what is driving me to choose these things. And Stevie, I totally agree. I often, it's like, it feels like you're swimming upstream. Yeah. It does. It is constantly batting away and having to say, no, that's not for me, or I'm making a different decision. I always come back to as compassionately as I possibly can, because everybody gets to make the best decision for themselves. Yeah. And this is just the decision that I have made. Stevie, do we have some time to answer a couple of the questions on the side?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go ahead and read a few of these. I think that this is really, and I'll try to synthesize it. I think that, what is your view on fasting? It's popular. I've tried it and I couldn't keep up with it. Felt too deprived.
Yep.
And then, do you have thoughts on how to address, so let's start with that one, because here's the thing is I know of physicians that very much actually believe in intermittent fasting. And this is the other point I was going to say is like healthcare accountability too. Because that's the other thing. Maggie, I also had my OB when I moved to Baltimore tell me that I was overweight. And so like, it's so funny, all these OBs, we need to have like a serious conversation with them. But I am curious, Kaitlin, what your thoughts are on fasting and intermittent fasting and all of this stuff that's going on.
Yes, absolutely. My first thing is intermittent fasting is, yes, there is research on it. Is it long-term? Absolutely not. It is all pretty short-term research. So anything that does come out is limited. What people, again, aren't really taking into account is what is the psychological ramifications of intermittent fasting? Is it actually being done under the care of a trained physician, or is it something that is, unfortunately, more often than not, gotten from Dr. Oz, or is it gotten from, is it a, just kind of thrown out there as something for you to try, and actually is done very poorly and incorrectly. I would also say for women specifically, intermittent fasting can be very harmful from a hormonal perspective. It wreaks havoc on our hormones. And the difficult piece, especially for women, is that something that we're always trying to kind of get in check to be able to get to a space where it's level. And I would say even for men too. And some people can do intermittent fasting and they're going to be totally fine. I would say others, and for the majority of anybody who has dieted, has disordered eating, has a difficult relationship with their food, has had an eating disorder in the past, intermittent fasting is no bueno. It plays too much into those mechanisms. And again, I read like a meme the other day that was basically saying like, congratulations, 20 something, you have now figured out a different way to talk about restriction, or, and it's like, yes, it's just another, so you put it in a different package and done the exact same thing.
Kaitlin, I would think too, just from my experience of working at the eating disorder clinic, that like for any person who might tend to restrict and then binge, intermittent fasting could be a huge trigger for that cycle.
Yes, it's huge. And it almost normalizes and okays that mechanism, because it really is saying, you're going through, anywhere from 6, 12, 15, 20 hours without eating, and then you're eating these massive meals. And if we're really talking about body cueing, it's putting that aside. You're having to shut down cues with coffee, with water, with, however you're doing it. But yes, absolutely. You're going to rev that up very quickly. And again, we come back to the binge restrict cycle.
And, I think that there is a question from Maggie on, do you have thoughts on how to address doctors that refer to the BMI chart, or is that something we should just cope and give self-compassion on?
Yes, and yes.
Okay.
Yes. It is an opportunity. There are, luckily, and I am starting to have more of a list of practitioners who are more weight inclusive and weight neutral. It is very hard in healthcare right now because, unfortunately, when your weight is seen, other things don't get diagnosed. They don't get prioritized, and everything is chalked up to lose weight. And that is, again, detrimental for many reasons, but it also puts this pressure in that pathology onto the body, that it is your thing to fix, that it is broken. And so what I encourage clients to do is to, first of all, and this is a fun game, You go into the doctor's office and you do not get weighed. You do not have to get weighed at the doctor's office. They have enough other indicators to be able to facilitate an appropriate appointment. It is appropriate to, to be able to give medications. So what I do and what I, have clients prepare for is literally going in and say, I prefer not to be weighed. You will sometimes get pushback. Other times they'll just kind of look at you funny, or say, no, you have to. You do not have to get weighed. So that is the first thing that I often say. And that can really set the tone for the practice. What else I encourage clients to do is to really go in with a note sheet, either a long list to either hand over to the doctor or have a note card of things saying, I'd prefer not to talk about weight. It's triggering for me. I have a history of disordered eating. I'm trying to heal my relationship with food in my body, and I'd prefer us just not talk about it. I hear clients who are in fat bodies all the time. Their doctors are trying to suggest weight loss. And it's like, I'm fully aware I'm in a fat body. Thank you. That's not, new to me. And so when we can shift the focus to what's actually healthcare, it's a great help to really get more well-rounded, compassionate care.
That's so amazing. And it gets back again to that accountability of feeling accountable anytime you go into a doctor's office. Like, it is up to you to go in prepared, to have questions ready, to know what result are you seeking, and you are not giving up your decisions to somebody else. We aren't outsourcing healthcare decisions. And I think that's part of that's so at the core of WISE, and what we're trying to get people to understand is that is not something that just because somebody has a degree in something, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are perfect. It doesn't mean that they just they practice this, and yes, they can be an expert in some places, but you deserve every right to have that. So I've actually never thought about that, Kaitlin, about saying no thank you. Because I think about how much that's actually getting on the scale in the past has made me kick the can down the road from going to see my physician. I'm like, not this month, maybe next month, and it's just crazy.
Absolutely.
The things we tell ourselves. So
yes, and that you don't have to go through this process. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think the other part is reminding yourself that you know your body better than anybody else. No matter if you're told that or not, especially women going into a healthcare setting alone, you know your body better than anybody else. That's so important to remember.
I think that's why this was such a both infuriating and invalidating experience, because when I got pregnant, I was at a very healthy size, and she knows nothing about my history, literally nothing. And so the experience was terrible. And I've never had a doctor act that way. And I was shocked because it was a woman, and I was like, you should know better. It was bad.
Well, again, I'm very sorry that happened to you, Maggie, but I do think that, like I said, not that it's good, but I do think that there's a lot of people that have experienced that. You're not alone in that. And I think that as we think about how we can change and be advocates for not only ourselves, but for other women who maybe haven't had the privilege of having this experience with Kaitlin, I think that, I'm going to take that on myself to that next time that it goes in, I'm gonna decline to step on the scale, because it's, I love that. So I know we're at a time, which this went so fast. This was just, we flew. I knew that this was gonna happen. So thank you so much for everybody who's joined. Thank you for staying the entire time and being actively engaged. Kaitlin and I have been talking about this being an ongoing dialogue, and what a circle could look like, and kind of looking at groups and understanding more. So I am going to send out a post-event survey. I know that there's a lot of people that also RSVP'd for this event who had trouble signing on for one reason or another. And so I will make sure that I do share this as long as that's okay with everybody. So let me know if that's not the case, and I will speak to you directly about that. But my thinking is, I think that this is a worthwhile discussion for us to continue to have as wise women, and how we can continue to support each other on kind of just dismantling everything that we've ever been taught about diet culture and our bodies, and giving ourselves a little more self-love. So Kaitlin, thank you so much. You're incredible. This was amazing. And everybody, I hope you have a wonderful evening. Bye. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Kaitlin. That was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you guys all for being here. Thank you, Stevie.
Thank you.
Kaitlin, wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thank
Just
you.
great.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.